Hello, friends, and welcome to the October 11th edition of Weekly Witness, Texas Impact's weekly opportunity for mainstream Texans of faith to learn about public policy issues here in the great state of Texas and have a conversation about how you can engage in the process. My name is Scott Attenip, your host and Texas Impact's Engagement Director, and today's episode is brought to you by Methodist Healthcare Ministries of South Texas and Friendship West Baptist Church in Dallas. So we are 3 weeks into the Texas legislature's third 30-day special session, and we have previous episodes that have focused on the primary issues the Texas legislature is considering, as well as the federal Build Back Better proposals that are working their way through Congress. And we'll be joined later in this program by Texas Impact's Advocacy Director, Josh Houston, for a legislative update on each one of the sessions in this session's call, as well as some other issues that the legislature is going to be considering. But for today's conversation, our highlighted conversation, we are excited to welcome to the conversation Texas Impact's legal fellow, Sid Earnheart, to discuss the situation at the border. Hey, Sid, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hey, thank you, Scott. Yeah, I appreciate you all having me. Thank you.
And I know you and Josh and I talked on Friday, and we said, depending on how the weekend went, we might focus some on college football today. But since it didn't, we're not. And I am going to liberally use the mute button in case you try to bring up any big games that might or might not have occurred this weekend. Is that fair?
That is definitely fair. I think the payment of lunch, that bounty will suffice for taking care of college football this time.
Mute. There we go. So we'll, I'm sure folks aren't turning in for our college football banter, but maybe if you pay us extra, we'll do a separate podcast on that. But let's dive in, because there is a lot taking place at the border right now. And, we talked after the legislative session, there wasn't a whole lot that moved in relation to border issues during the regular session, but here we are in the third special session, and it seemed like 27 seconds after the regular session ended, we started back up on border issues. So big picture, just paint a picture at the beginning for folks. What is the current reality at the Texas border?
Sure. I guess really big picture from my perspective is, look, especially from a policy standpoint, right? It's kind of reflective of politics in general right now, I would say. The political party that's in power in our state is definitely different from the political party that is in power in terms of the federal government right now. Parties are not working together and are seemingly refusing to do so. And this leads to less than optimal policies and outcomes and decision-making, as far as I'm concerned. In this case, the people that are suffering are going to be Texans, future generations of Texans, and then also migrants that are presenting at the South Texas border. Effectively, sheriffs have been testifying in hearings that there have been an increased number of migrants crossing the border outside of the ports of entry. And part of the solution being offered is a border barrier that's going to be constructed and is being constructed. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the border barrier and its implications throughout our conversation.
Sorry, having trouble with the unmute button today. So I did mention, in the open that the regular session of the Texas legislature largely ignored border issues, but, within minutes of adjourning, the border became front of mind for a lot of people. So what has happened since the original sine die in May?
Yeah, so, I'll take you back a little bit. In the spring, Texas lawmakers approved about $1 billion towards border security. Okay, and then kind of as you've talked about here, in a subsequent special session, the House approved another almost $2 billion, and that takes us to a total of about $3 billion for border security. Of that money, about $1 billion is reserved for the construction of a physical barrier along the border, and I reached that number by getting a $250 million down payment, as it's being called, that was paid for the border wall over the summer, and then another $750 million that's been reserved for the construction of a physical barrier of some type. And, in this answer alone, I think you kind of heard me refer to what is being constructed as both a wall and a barrier, and there's other terms out there like a fence even. That's because the way it has been talked about and the way it's being talked about, right, are changing In some cases, based on the timing of when these events are happening, and then other times, depending on who's doing the talking. So I'm going to refer to it and try to consistently refer to it as a barrier throughout this topic, unless there needs to be some kind of distinguishment made on my end. And in some places, it really could be all three things. It is a concrete barrier in some places, from how we understand it. Other times, it's a 9 to 10 foot tall wire fence that has some kind of security on the top of it. It's also unclear how much of this barrier Texans are going to be getting for the $1 billion that our public officials have decided to spend on it. I will tell you that in the past, the governor's office has said that they estimate about 733 miles of Texas's 1,200-mile border with Mexico needs some type of barrier.
So, over the course of the last few weeks, I don't want to say virtually every, but many Texas committees have been having hearings on this topic. So what are the takeaways of those hearings so far?
Yeah, that's a good question. And obviously that's, a lot more than what we can just cover kind of in this conversation. But I would say one of the most interesting takeaways, I think from a Texans of faith perspective, and from a perspective of people who are wanting and seeking justice, right, and who are justice-minded, has been the information that's come out about Operation Lone Star. And I'm going to try to briefly tell you what Operation Lone Star is, and it's definitely complex. So I guess I will say, Scott, if you have questions along the way or even at the end, feel free to ask them to me if I kind of didn't explain things as clearly, or if I kind of skipped too many steps. Because I'm pretty deep in the weeds on this kind of stuff. And so Operation Lone Star is, I would call it effectively, it's a migrant arrest program is how I would describe it. Earlier in the year, Governor Abbott declared a disaster declaration regarding the number of migrants presenting and crossing at the South Texas border. In part, that allowed him to dispatch more DPS officers and the Texas National Guard to the border to help with the situation. The DPS and the National Guard are arresting people that they believe are migrants. It's my understanding that the focus is on adult males that are not traveling with family units, meaning the family units or non-adult males are being turned over to Border Patrol rather than being arrested by DPS. What does that mean exactly, and why is it happening? Well, this is a kind of a screening technique. And so most of the family units crossing the border outside of a port of entry are claiming asylum. And that's why they're being referred to Customs and Border Patrol, which is a federal agency. Adult males that are traveling alone also can make asylum claims, but the state has decided to try and criminalize and penalize these men. So most of the arrests are taking place in Val Verde and Kinney counties. Typically, the men are charged with a Class A misdemeanor, and then they're taken to the Briscoe unit in Frio County. Some are transferred over to Segovia because of a lack of capacity in the Briscoe unit. And then what happens is they're supposed to be assigned a criminal defense attorney and arraigned via Zoom. A lot of them plead guilty for time served, and then they're released either into ICE custody, which is, again, a federal agency, right? Or they're taken to an ICE detention center, or they're expelled from the United States through Title 42. We've seen reports that for the men arrested in Val Verde County, the county prosecutor is dismissing charges against them if they have an asylum claim. If that occurs, the men are transported by TDCJ, which is a Texas agency, back to the border, and then they're picked up by Border Patrol, which is a federal agency. Then they're transferred to a border detention center or expelled under Title 42. In Kinney County, right, which is a much more rural county than Val Verde County, all right, it has about 3,600 people in the entire county, all right? To give you an idea, in 2020, when we're talking about like the increase in terms of the number of cases that they're prosecuting, all right, for any or it's my understanding that for any or all misdemeanors that were actually prosecuted in Kinney County in the year 2020, it was less than 20. And you can see just in what you've picked up in the newspapers, right, that thousands of people, right, thousands of men have been picked up and have been arrested and are being charged. I would say that, I guess you've also probably seen in the news recently, there was a mass habeas petition filed on behalf of these men, and the judge ordered hundreds of them released that didn't already have charges filed against them. The Texas Tribune exposed people, these men, they didn't have access to public defenders for weeks. I would tell you, obviously, for Texans of faith, that's a serious concern about a violation of due process rights, especially when people are being held for months and then going for weeks without access to an attorney or without being charged with anything. And I guess I would also say this, many of the people that are being arrested are asylum seekers, and they have robust asylum claims.
So just point of clarification, because you mentioned it a couple of times. You mentioned Title 42, which I know has been in the news over the course of the last few weeks as advocates and others have pushed on the Biden administration. But can you explain Title 42, what it is, and maybe why it's still there?
That's a yes. That's definitely. So Title 42 is kind of this obscure healthcare code, and I'm probably going to foul it up. And you may have even seen recently that there was a federal judge that said, we're no longer to expel migrants under Title 42 that have asylum claims at the South Texas border. But basically, Title 42 has been used to it really started being used under the prior administration when the migrant protection protocols or Remain in Mexico policies were put in place to expel asylum seekers from basically being able to make their claims from asylum and be inside the United States while those claims were being processed under the former administration because of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Thanks. So there is a lot going on at the border, and it just seems like there are different news stories every day. What should listeners, what should Texans of faith be paying attention to right now and moving forward?
Yeah, great question. I would say, look, leaders from both parties, right, have kind of raised this alarm about there being a humanitarian crisis at the South Texas border. I would say the fact that, I'm hoping anyway, both parties recognize that should at least be some good news from an awareness standpoint. Of course, I would say anyway, one of the biggest issues is they disagree on how to respond. As people of faith, right, we're called to treat all of God's creation with love and respect. We're called to welcome all humans with dignity, especially those that have been marginalized and oppressed. So I would pay attention to the state of Texas, which, kind of as we covered briefly here, has been trampling on the Constitution and due process rights afforded therein. I would pay attention to solutions being proposed by both sides, and yet their policy solutions not reflecting the treatment of immigrants with dignity and respect. I would, always ask the question, how would you or I feel if we were in a similar situation and we were being treated in this way? And then finally, I'd pay attention to the amount of money being spent on erecting this barrier that I would say is relatively easy to scale, to cut through, to go around. Given all the infrastructure needs that 2020 and 2021 have exposed for Texans, like improvements to the electrical grid, technology deficiencies in school districts, growing healthcare needs of Texans, I would be examining whether or not this barrier is the best use of taxpayer dollars. And I guess I would finish it with this. No, Mexico isn't paying for the barrier. No, private donors aren't paying for the barrier. Texas taxpayer dollars are paying for this.
Is there a benefit in calling our legislators right now? A lot of this is, the administration, the Abbott administration acting. Is there anything we should be calling our legislators on right now?
I mean, I would say there's always, and I think you guys would scold me if I didn't. I would always say that there's a benefit to being in communication with your legislators right now. I guess since we are still technically in a special session, I suppose something could be done about it. But I would tell you that there's always a benefit to having that relationship with your publicly elected officials. And certainly there are things that you can call and discuss with them. And as always, I guess I would offer up for those listening, Texas Impact is happy to help you in a variety of ways. If you are looking for talking points, if you need connections, if you need any assistance in that regard.
So changing topics a little bit, earlier this year, you were obviously very involved in Texas Impact's work regarding unaccompanied migrant children being placed into state licensed facilities here in Texas. Can you give us a quick update on the federal policy regarding that topic? Yes.
So recently, and I know it's a lot, and I won't unpack all of it again, but just like you said, right? Texas Impact released this report regarding unaccompanied migrant children and the abuses they were suffering in Texas facilities. The facilities are state licensed, and then they are federally funded. We wrote a report that highlighted some of the abuses that were occurring and basically proposed some simple, straightforward changes to what could be done to, I would say, regarding more oversight. And specifically regarding some of the regulations that we felt needed to occur based on funding and really not using taxpayer dollars to, I guess I'll say, fund facilities that had histories of abuse regarding children. The federal government last month in September opened up what is called a request for information. This is something that is publicly done. Anyone around the country could have made a comment on it. And they asked, the topic for the request for information was specifically related to looking into the possibility of licensing these facilities federally as opposed to at the state level. We certainly took that request for information based on some other things you've seen with the state of Texas, whereas and I'm going a little bit, I'm kind of backtracking a little bit here, but one of the reasons for this request for information was because earlier this summer, the state of Texas said it was no longer going to license these facilities to care for unaccompanied children. That was done through an executive order by the governor. What happened then was Health and Human Services came out and basically extended the amount of time that these facilities could license or could continue to license and carry these and care for these unaccompanied children. So in response to what has basically become a political game at the state level or between the state and the federal government put out this request for information. We, of course, responded with some of the work that we did earlier in the year that proposed changes for requiring more oversight, for I guess just ensuring that these children aren't just merely political pawns that are just continually being subjected to abuse, psychologically, sexually, physically, and effectively we called for the federal government to engage the faith community in places like Texas to help come up with better solutions so that these children are better cared for.
So we have a couple of questions in the chat if you have a second. Sid, first, and this is, I think, maybe a stump the attorney question. Let's see if it
probably will stump me then. Yep.
So would it be legal under U.S. law to mandate vaccination of anyone crossing the border into the U.S. who are not citizens or have documentation? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So the answer is, I'll tell you straight away. I do not know the answer to that as I'm sitting right here. Right. That's not something that I personally, I guess, have researched, and so I would not want to tell you. I guess I would not want to tell you something incorrect about that. So it's definitely an interesting question. Yes.
Fair answer. I appreciate when attorneys do not try to answer things they don't know. So thank you. Another question from the chat with regard to U.S. immigration policy. Might it be possible for those applying for asylum or immigration of the U.S. to make the application in their home countries and then come in a more orderly manner? It's a question from the chat.
Yeah, and thank you for showing me that. I'm looking at it now. I would say, well, the answer is just from a policy perspective, could it be done? Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say, I think that there are, the answer is possibly it could be done. Typically, if you're applying for, and I'm not going to go into too many of the nuances, but typically if you're applying for something in your home country, it's usually refugee status as opposed to asylee status, or at least as the current system works, that's typically how it is. I would say, though, that yes, I think a number of things should be on the table policy-wise in terms of both just immigration law in general right now, right? I mean, I think you'll see if you're, just from the perspective, from my perspective, from the national perspective, immigration law needs to be overhauled in general right now. There are a number of policies that need to be considered and reconsidered. And I think that there are spaces for all different kinds of voices and new solutions that don't currently exist under the new system. And I think that that's one thing that all the parties can agree upon, and that is that the system is broken. I guess like so many different issues right now, I think the question is who is going to work together in order to, I guess, kind of fix it, for lack of a better term.
All right, Sid, appreciate the conversation. Any closing thoughts or anything you'd leave us with today? Shameless plugs you'd like to make?
I guess I would just say, my prayers in general just go out to, everyone out there right now. I know 2020 was, has been difficult worldwide. Same with 2021. And I will just say, I really appreciate everyone that has their heart out there for just people who are suffering right now, especially immigrants who are suffering, especially for migrants showing up at our borders that are escaping terrible, horrific, tragic situations in their own country. So I just thank you all for having opening hearts and minds, and ask you to continue being a part of the conversations in your communities and with your public officials about what we can do just to help support them and just help make this world a better place.
All right, Sid Earnheart, thank you so much for the time today, and we'll look forward to continuing to track this topic in the weeks and months to come. I know there will be opportunities for Texans Faith to engage. So thanks for your time today. Thanks for the work you're doing every day.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. And thanks everyone for listening.
Next, we are excited to welcome to the conversation Texas Impact's Advocacy Director, Josh Houston. Josh, welcome to the conversation.
Thanks for having me again.
Josh, these sessions are seemingly never ending. I feel like we're going to have a legislative update almost every week this year. But jumping in, remind us where we are in the third called special session. We have like 9 days left. Remind us what was on the call and what we're looking to accomplish this session, or what the legislature is. I don't know that we want to accomplish any of that, but.
Yeah, well, it was, first and foremost, it's a redistricting special session. This is the special session that we always knew was coming because of the late arrival of the census. So let's kind of walk through the call. Number one, redistricting. Number two would be the ARPA money, which is the American Rescue Plan Act, the federal money that has come down to the states. That the legislature wanted to have a say in appropriating, and that is therefore on the call, and the legislature is doing that as we speak as well. Third is the transports bill for yet a fourth time this year. We're having this debate again. Fourth on the call, vaccine mandates, and by that we mean the governor has given the legislature the option to ban vaccine mandates or otherwise regulate them. Fifth is a bill about dog chaining, which we haven't really gotten too involved with as an organization, but is nevertheless on the call. And then we had, and this is perfectly normal, but the governor can add items to the call at any point in the 30 days of a special session. And so there have been a couple of rounds of additions. In the first round of additions, you had 2 items added, which is property tax relief. And second was the constitutional amendment on bail that failed in the previous 3 sessions. It was part of, you'll recall that there was a big bill that did pass on redoing how we do bail in Texas. Part of that bill required a constitutional amendment, and that constitutional amendment failed in the second special session. We'll talk about where that bill's at. But then finally, we had a second round of additions to the call where the governor added increasing penalties for the offense of illegal voting, which had to do with Senate Bill 1 and an amendment that was done on Senate Bill 1, where they're trying to now take the penalties back to where they were previous to Senate Bill 1. It was actually a reduction in a penalty that was done in Senate Bill 1 that they will be revisiting.
So let's walk through those and have you give us an update on where we are in terms of each of those items, starting with the one that you listed first, which is kind of the one they have to get done, right? So not whether or not it happens in this special session or not, but where are we on redistricting?
Yeah, so right now the Supreme Court has not wanted to weigh in on the legislative authority. So to refresh everyone's memory, the Texas Constitution is kind of crystal clear that redistricting shall be done in the first regular session after the census data is released. That would have been 2023 before they could have touched redistricting. Nevertheless, they have decided to undertake redistricting anyway. So there is that court case that is pending, to be determined. So here we are doing redistricting in the special session. And where we're at with it is the Senate has largely decided on their maps. The House maps are more complicated because there's 5 times the number of members. And they also have the state constitution has what's called the county line rule, where you can't do like they do. So with congressional maps, you'll see a district go from the Red River all the way down through Dallas, down to Waco sometimes. And there's nothing illegal about that. But for the Texas State House, you have to try to keep it contiguous within the county. With the exception for what you do when you have a 4.5 or a 3.5 representation in a county. So that makes the job a lot harder. And what the speaker has said all along is that there will be no bills move through the House until the House has completed the redistricting maps for the House, which makes sense. I mean, that's going to be the hardest job. The speaker has the hardest job in this regard, in trying to keep 150 members happy. They won't be. They will fight with each other, and the speaker's got to try to get those maps done. So that is going to happen tomorrow. The redistricting maps for the House, State House, are going to be on the House floor tomorrow, and that's going to be the thing to watch. And then the House will presumably take up legislation once they get that work done.
So a reminder for those who are listening in other ways, not with us live, tomorrow is Tuesday as we are recording here on Monday. So we'll continue to watch that. And I assume we'll be talking about this more next Monday as those maps potentially move closer to completion. But the next one, which is one that I know B's talked a lot about, we had Eva de Luna Castro on a couple of weeks ago doing an episode on the American Rescue Plan Act funds. Where are we on those?
So there are a couple of bills. The one to watch appears to be Senate Bill 8, although there's also a Senate Bill 2. Senate Bill 8 has made it through the state Senate and has made it over to the House. House Appropriations is having a hearing on it tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. So to give you some idea of the order in which they'll probably do things, after they do redistricting, that bill will be presumably postured to go next, because that's the major big thing. Is anything appropriating money is always going to be a big major thing. And so that is likely to go next. I think the thing to watch is, does the House just take what the Senate sent over, or does the House have other ideas about what they want to do with the money? The reason I bring that up is because if the House has other ideas, that bill would, of course, have to go to a conference committee. And that is when you would get into some, and I think that's highly likely, and that's where you would get into the House, Senate, gubernatorial politics of trying to strike a bargain between all three of those major players.
All right, next on the list is one that we've talked about kind of extensively over the course of the last few weeks, the trans sports bill. Where are we?
Yeah, so that is where we start getting into the grand bargain, where it's going to kind of like, what ideas does the House have with the appropriations bill? Is the trans sports bill going to be part of some negotiated bargain? A thing to watch on that is the Senate has already passed Senate Bill 3, which is the trans sports bill in the Senate. It's gone through the Senate, it's over in the House. The House referred it to the House Public Education Committee, which, of course, is the committee that this bill has gone to in the regular and previous two special sessions, the last three times. Then the House did an interesting thing to refresh everyone's memory. The House has House Bill 25, and the Speaker referred it to the House Committee on Constitutional Remedies, which had a hearing on this bill and passed it out, and is now sitting in the Calendars Committee. Of course, if the House passes the House bill, it will have to go through the Senate. And so the question is, how long does the House Calendars Committee sit on this bill? Do they sit on it in perpetuity? Do they sit on it long enough to try to exact whatever deal the Speaker wants out of the Lieutenant Governor and then send it over? It really remains to be seen. What happens with this and how long does it take? We have about, counting today, 10 days, 9 days really after today to try to get these things done. Wait and see. This is one of the chess pieces that observers are going to watch in regard to. So you got the chess piece of the ARPA money, the appropriations bill, and then you got this chess piece. And how are these things related remains to be seen, but it is certainly being positioned to be part of the big chessboard.
I assume that most of the families we've heard testify and some of the faith leaders and transgender students who've testified would love to not be a part of that chessboard anymore.
They've been a chess piece. It's kind of gross. It is gross. Playing with children as a chess piece, but nevertheless, I hate to describe it that way. Yet that is what is occurring, so I describe it to be matter of fact and not whatever.
Yeah, not criticizing your use of the term. It's the fact that they.
No, I want to be exceptionally clear that the way I describe a thing is not the way it's not our opinion about it. That should not be true, but nevertheless is.
And I'll add on that one because we did send out a rapid response notification last week asking members to call members of the House Calendars Committee and ask them to oppose or not schedule that bill. So it sounds like that ask is still there as of noon on Monday.
Continue to do the work on that. It's not done yet. Never stop fighting. The real play is the real fight is occurring in the House, which has been the far more reasonable chamber. Nothing is complete on this yet. Nothing's changed since our last update.
So vaccine mandates, that's one we haven't talked about much this third special session, but what's happening there?
Yeah, we have not talked about it, and neither has the legislature. To date, neither chamber has held hearings on this. I don't know what they're thinking, but the evidence of it being, no hearing with 10 days to go does not seem to be a priority item of either the Speaker or the Lieutenant Governor, at least as far as we can tell. I'll tell you. Well, we'll tell you why, because this is a big thing, right? if this moves, we'll have to engage it. So I do want to speak about it a little bit because, and I do want to speak about it because either we have to engage it in a hurry or we have to engage it in a fourth special session. The thing I failed to mention about redistricting is that the congressional maps there's not a bill on it yet. They've moved the Senate maps, they've moved the House maps, they've moved the State Board of Education maps. There appears to be some contention about the congressional maps, and there is rumor at this date of a fourth special session. So if there's a fourth special session, this could be an item on the call for the fourth. So we need to talk about it a little bit because it involves the faith community directly, not just as a matter of the faith community having an opinion about policy, but because faith communities are employers. So there are a couple of things on the table. There's the idea of banning local government from being able to impose vaccine mandates on its employees. Then there's a separate track of employers being prohibited from imposing vaccine mandates on private sector employees. The faith community is a subset of the private sector. And many faith communities, and this is not a thing they're going to want to hear, but it is a thing that is absolutely true that we should be ready to say. Many faith communities have a sincerely held religious belief that we should be protecting life and that vaccines are one of the ways that we go about protecting one another when we care for our neighbor. Therefore, if they were to try to prohibit private employers, we would oppose that from being able to impose vaccine mandates. We would oppose it on principle, but also we would need to say an additional thing, which is if you are going to do it, we oppose it. But if you're going to do it, then we should have a religious freedom exemption so that we should be exempted from your legislation so that we can continue to impose that our employees be vaccinated in order to protect each other and parishioners. I don't know that that's a space they want to venture into, but it is certainly a space that we would need to force them into because it is a matter of religious faith for us.
So stay tuned on vaccine mandates. Also, public service announcement, get your shots. I'm wondering on this next one, I heard my dogs barking earlier. I'm sure you heard them too, and they'll make an appearance on this episode. I don't know if it's because my kids are home doing things that are making them bark or because they heard you say dog chaining and just wanted to weigh in on the topic. But dog chaining is not something we've spent a lot of time talking about. What's happening there?
No, and this is a bill that passed both chambers during the regular session for reasons, and it's not a thing we follow that closely, and I don't want to spend too much time on it, but the governor vetoed it for reasons that he stated in the veto proclamation. If you care about it and want to look it up, I can't recite to you the exact reasons, but enough pressure caused the governor to want to put it back on the call and find a way to get it done. So this bill has moved along. It is through the Senate. Senate Bill 5 is the number. It's in House State Affairs. It will probably, there's not a lot of controversy on the legislative branch about it. So it is probably going to be one of those things that just moves along, kind of independent of all the other issues.
All right, so that wraps up what was on the initial call. You mentioned that property tax relief was added. So what's happening there?
Right. So the property tax relief bill number is Senate Bill 1, and that is significant because that tends to connotate the level of priority for the lieutenant governor. And so that is the item that the lieutenant governor wanted. It seemed to be an item that the governor found at least acceptable. So the governor added it to the call. It tends to be a thing that Republicans don't feel too much internal fighting over, maybe some of the details, but not necessarily in the general idea. That bill sits in the House Ways and Means Committee. It has already had a hearing. So it is also positioned to be possibly part of a grand deal. And so the question there, I think, again, the reason that we have some hope, even if it's small, on the transports bill is that the property tax bill could actually be of more importance to Lieutenant Governor if it ends up in the grand bargain. So we'll see what happens with this. But watch this bill in relation to the appropriations bill, in relation to the transports bill. How does all this shake out in the next 9 days? We'll wait and see.
Sounds like we have a busy week coming up. Also added the constitutional amendment for bail. Any updates there?
Yeah, and this may be, again, a fourth item as part of that grand bargain. So to back up and say, during the second special session, the legislature passed, I think it was Senate Bill 6, but don't hold me to that number. It was a bill that was reform. It was redoing. I don't know that reform is the right word, but it certainly redid how we did bail in Texas. Part of that required a constitutional amendment because there is a constitutional right to bail. There are some, and we're not undoing the constitutional right to bail, but we may be restructuring how and who gets that right and when and under what circumstances. So that part of the bill that required a constitutional amendment failed. And I think there is an open question about whether it failed on policy merits or whether it failed because Democrats were just mad. To get through the House, you would need 100 votes. And there are 83 Republicans in the House. So you need some number of Democrats to go along with it. The reason I say it is interesting to watch is because do you get 13 votes in exchange for not doing the transports bill? We don't have any special insight of that, but that is certainly a potential bargaining chip here in the waning days of the third special. And then is it a chip that they could even bargain with? Because if you're going to a fourth special session, then they can just add the transports bill again, and we're here for a fifth time. So, but and again, watch that space. It's a potential negotiation point in the coming days.
Hey, remember when the legislature used to meet for 140 days every other year? That was fun.
Right. It's the way it should be. The less they meet, the less they can screw up. And anyway, it's for the voters to determine whether or not. I'll just stop there. Clearly, we like less days.
I'll move us on. So the last one that's been added to the call, and man, they just can't stop talking about voting. But you mentioned increased penalties for illegal voting. What's happening there? Right? I thought we just did
We just did, and that is part of it. Is there was an amendment by a Republican that lowered a penalty from a felony to a Class A misdemeanor, and it is unknown whether it was intentional or not. What we can say to be fact, we don't know what anybody's intent was, but we can point to the fact that this bill was reviewed by the Senate. It was reviewed by the governor's office. It was reviewed by the attorney general's office. It was reviewed by attorneys in the House. It was reviewed by the House itself. But a number of advocates on, frankly, the far right were upset about the change, even though they completely won on the issue and passed a great big omnibus voter suppression bill. 99 out of 100 isn't enough for people sometimes. And they felt they had either the power or who knows what they felt, but they decided to make this an issue. And that caused the Senate to say, oh, we didn't mean this. Who knows? Nevertheless, it became an issue. The governor, I should back up and say that the former president of the United States actually weighed in on this. And then after that, the governor then added it to the call. And the Senate quickly passed Senate Bill 10. And I say quickly, I mean, they filed it, had a hearing, and moved it all in one day, if I recall correctly, within 48 hours, certainly. And so this bill is sitting over in the House right now. It has been referred to the House Committee on Constitutional Remedies, where it sits. So stay tuned. We're whether or not this is a mistake or not is all kind of shaking out in real time. but it is certainly a thing to watch. It is a thing to watch.
Are they currently scheduled to meet, or they just we wait?
There is not a hearing on this bill. Last time I checked, again, they've got to get through all those other items I just mentioned.
Yeah.
I think there's some feeling that if there's going to be a fourth, they could deal with it there. If there's really a sense of urgency, it's a little bit unclear. It's a little bit unclear how the penalties got reduced in the first place. I mean, we know the mechanics of it, but what were the motivations is a little bit unclear to the lobby, and what kind of how much protection of certain members is needed from the speaker's office. How much is the speaker going to weigh in or not weigh in, or block or not block, or move or not move? It's a little bit of a volatile space. So I think we're going to have to wait and see on this one a little bit. And which brings me to kind of the last thing. Go ahead, Scott.
Not on the. We've talked, and it's not on the call yet as of Monday, but a lot of noise about election audits. So
so you've got to see Senate Bill 10 in relationship to the items not on the call, because all of this election space is related. So what is not on the call as often is as interesting as what is. And so also going on simultaneously, you will remember that the state of Arizona did a great big audit. It was not, how shall we say, there was a private company that was contracted to do the audit. The company had very little credentials in having audit experience. The company is a company that is owned by allies to the former President Donald Trump. It was also funded. The whole project was funded by allies to the President Trump. And so, and nevertheless, the audit actually resulted in more votes for President Biden, which would be humorous, except for the fact that we just continue to cast doubt on a thing that we continue to give fuel to the fire of a conspiracy theory that has no basis in fact. And so this audit idea is spreading to other states. The ex-president, former president of the United States, is continuing to push this narrative that the election was stolen. There is zero evidence that it was stolen. In fact, the more auditing they do, the more they prove it to be not only accurate, but finding more votes for the actual president, current President Biden. Nevertheless, the more they put fuel on this fire, the more the story just continues, which really seems to be the point in and of itself. So here we are in Texas with where the former president kind of called out support for an audit. The governor capitulated and ordered the Secretary of State through executive order to do an audit of 4 counties: Dallas, Collin, Tarrant, and Harris. And then that did not prove to be enough. So there is now a bill to do a more comprehensive audit in search of a thing that doesn't exist, that has had no evidence that it exists. So this bill is Senate Bill 47. It is not on the call. Nevertheless, the Senate passed it anyway, even though it's not on the call. There's each chamber controls its own rules. So I guess it was up to the Senate parliamentarian who somehow determined it to be on the call. The House parliamentarian seems to disagree. And I say that because this bill has not been referred to a committee. It's just sitting. And I bring it up to say that has caused the former president of the United States, Donald Trump, to threaten a primary for our speaker in his home district. Watch this space. And so Senate Bill 10, Senate Bill 47, the audit and the increased penalties seem to be related. They have some relationship to each other in this grand political drama that is unfolding in Texas. And of course, if we go to a 4th special session, the drama will continue.
Right. Well, that's a pretty solid wrap up for today. And I'd encourage y'all to keep your eye on Texas Impact, social media, and rapid response updates for changes throughout the course of this week. But Josh, anything you want to leave us with today?
No, I kind of covered it.
All right. Well, appreciate the time. And thank you for tuning in today. If you have stayed with us this long, I hope that you have enjoyed the content and will give us a rating or review in your favorite podcast source, wherever you're listening to us. Go give us a like, a rating, or review. And Josh, we want the highest number of stars for that, right?
Yeah, that would be how it works.
That's right. All the stars. And remember to keep an eye on Texas Impact social media for upcoming announcements, or you can email me at scott@texasimpact.org with questions. And remember, if you appreciate Texas Impact and the Weekly Witness community, make sure that you and your congregation are members by going to texasimpact.org/join. Friends, we are in the third called special session after a 140-day regular session. This is an unprecedented time in Texas government. And we need Texans of faith active and engaged, paying attention to what's going on, and making sure your representatives are hearing from you. Let's get to work.